Are you ready to see your
Hey, shalom and welcome to Wisdom in Torah Ministries. As you know, we have a weekly class with Professor Mark Chavalas. He's kind enough to give us his time, and we get an opportunity to try to learn from him and to have a discussion about ancient Near East and certain topics that we're covering. And I'm really excited and happy that you are part of this because we want you to get a glimpse of what we do, how we study, sources we quote, the process of research and study, what it takes. And if you watch us, I've been doing this now for 16 years. Professor has been doing it for 40. So clearly, we're tapping into that understanding in the process of how to study. Uh, we've been doing this almost every Monday. Every Monday.
Yeah.
Today, he kind of says he kind of would like to continue as long as he's able. We're going to continue to do that. So welcome, Professor. Again, this week we're going to have some good time. You are like sporting a brand new hat there.
Well, this is my new Brooklyn Dodgers hat. So it's a vintage 1941 pennant-winning Dodgers hat. And as
Pennant, you have to just throw that in. Pennant
well, of
winning.
course, yes. Well, they did lose to another team, some other team from New York. I forget
Oh,
who
I
they're
know.
called.
Well, you
Uh,
guys won it this year, though. You got Shohei, and then
yeah.
pay him almost $1 billion. I'm just saying. And then it justifies it. You spend that kind of money, you win the championship. You go like, okay, we spend the money. I'm sure we got it back in 1 year, which they did, by the way. I'm pretty sure they made that money back. So it's kind of not a bad investment.
Well, especially since they deferred, 90% of it.
I mean, talk about living your whole life knowing that you don't have to worry about money for the next 30 years after
Yeah.
you retire. I mean, talk about that. It's gonna
Yeah.
be amazing.
Sounds
That's
good to
kind
me.
of that's kind of wise. And by the way, which basically it guarantees the inheritance for his children.
That's right. There you
What a
go.
tie-in to the topic today, huh?
Yeah. Yeah, that's
So we're
really
going to be talking about inheritance. By the way, I want you guys to know that Professor picks the topics. Mark, he picks the topics. I want him to pick the topics that he feels like he can really bring a lot of content to it and allows us to understand. It's kind of cool. And then I go and he gives me homework, tells me what to look for. I go back and look at it, and it's kind of interesting that the stuff that you are telling me to study, right, is something that I've read in the past because you validated some of the sources I use, but then going over them again, it seems like it's brand new.
yeah.
That does How
Yes.
do you feel teaching ancient Near East at the college university that you were in, and the curriculums going over, but every time you do your research, I'm sure you pick up something new.
Oh, in fact, after a while, I think I was probably, I can say this sort of with quotes, self-centered in the sense that I'd be doing research and realize, I wonder, I'm interested in this subject, so I think maybe my students might be interested in it. So that's what I'm going to talk about today. So, for example, the whole issue of inheritance, when I would be teaching an Akkadian class, I'm saying, oh, we're going to look at texts that involve inheritance. You know why? Because that's what I'm interested in today, or adoption, or women, or what have you. And so
Yeah.
I could do that. And since it was my curriculum, I had the ability to be able to do that. So from that standpoint, it was a lot of fun.
Well, that's kind of cool because um, I remember when I began to ask questions and I do the research. And I remember reading articles by Mendenhall and also by the books by you and also John Walton, Meredith Klein, McCarthy, and Moshe Wainfeld. And as I'm reading the material, there's so much in there to draw from, right? So
Yeah.
they were answering my questions. And then I asked myself a question. I said, well, if I had a question like this, and I found the answer. How many people out there have the same questions about the Bible that they also want to know? And that's how I began to start promoting some of the teachings. Hey, I got this question. I found this answer. What do you think? And that's what continued to snowball in the last 15 years that way.
Yeah. In fact, and I'm sure that the fact that you're bringing up a question that usually people wouldn't even be thinking about. And then it's like, oh, I hadn't even noticed that when I went through this passage or that passage. And so so kudos to you for that, because you're bringing things up that
I'm trying. It's
yeah,
not easy
well,
sometimes
yeah,
because the religious mind wants to stay within the box.
yep,
And I'm trying to break that box and have the freedom to examine every possibility. And today is going to be one of those possibilities and topics. The main source I'll be using that you
yeah,
recommended is Raymond Westbrook. It's called Everyday Law, a Law in Biblical Israel. He also has another one that I have here in Logos that is called, I have a hard copy, Property and the Family in Biblical Law, which I
yeah,
think is also very good.
yes,
And he talks about inheritance. And I read this already a few times,
right.
but I missed a lot the first few times I read. I guess because I'm not reading just over it, I'm trying to pay attention to the particular topic in itself.
Yes,
And if you would allow me, let me read
sure.
from page 101, 102. And because when we read the Bible, we are, and by the way, he's professor's an expert in the Nuzi tablets. You know, he studied those, so he's quoting from that. And I'm sure you can expound a lot on this, but it is so similar to biblical law in this case.
Yeah,
And many people are not connecting the inheritance laws of the Bible with the ancient Near East. And I've always said that if you attacked the land of Israel, meaning if you speak against, if you talk against it, if you attack it, that's an inheritance that God gave his people.
right.
And there are legal ramifications for doing so. And people don't consider that. So I think inheritance when it comes to the family, when I was looking at the Anchor Yo Bible, I looked for inheritance, but it's not giving me that. It's giving me family.
Yeah,
That's
right.
interesting.
Yes.
And before I go into it, tell us why is that? The Anchor Yo Bible commentary, when it talks about inheritance, it's not separating it as something devoid of family. It's actually interconnected with the firstborn blessing in the family.
I think that that's exactly right. I think our culture, especially in Anglo culture, I think in many respects is that, we've broken things up. And so we think of inheritance like something that's my personal, possession that I get. But and so we almost do separate it out from the rest of family. I get mine and you get yours. Now we can go our separate ways. But
Right.
it's not really thought of that way. And so the family is the core. Inheritance is one of the things that connects the family. And so it stems from family, not the other way around. I think that maybe that's one way to look at it.
It's interesting because today, nowadays, when there's someone that lives in a state, normally the inheritance always becomes a point of contention.
Right,
It divides the family. Now, also, we saw evidence of that in the story of Joseph and Reuben. And we
right.
understood why, because of the hierarchy and the way everything happened. But would you consider the adoption of Ephraim and Manasseh, like we covered last week, as also creating the space for them to receive the inheritance legally? So when Jacob gave the proclamation that he's adopted Ephraim and Manasseh, it's not just to be part of the family, it's also to have an inheritance, which is greater in honor.
I think it's exactly that. In fact, that's the reason to explain why the Joseph tribe gets a double portion, because he's
Mhm.
the legal firstborn. And so you think about it, why is his tribe broken up into two, Ephraim and Manasseh? It's because that's the double portion. And so I think you're exactly right. And it's very easy to gloss over that. Like, what an odd thing. Why is Jacob, singling out his two sons? Nothing random, nothing in the Bible is random, but there's always a reason behind it. And it's really the ancient Near Eastern person who tries to figure out what that is. It's not necessarily what the rabbis say 1,000 years later, because they're looking at it from the standpoint of their own context. And of
I
course,
was just going to ask you that.
yeah,
I was just going to ask you that.
well, and I'm not, by the way, they still have a better handle on it than we do, because,
Yeah.
I can't help but do that myself. I mean, I'm a 21st century person. How can
Right.
I not think like a 21st century person? But if I study the ancient Near East, it forces me out of that little box
Yeah.
to try at least to have a fighting chance to understand what's going on, in biblical law or any other cultural attribute or family or the like. And by the way, inheritance, the Bible talks about inheritance. It doesn't ever explain it because it's so obvious. It's like
Yeah.
the life force for everything. You think about all those so-called boring genealogies and chronicles and
Yeah.
all the inheritance laws and all the stuff inheritance in Joshua. That's really, really important for um, you think about it. If these books are being looked at after the exile, they're thinking, all right, now we're trying to reconstruct our whole society. It's been destroyed. We lost our temple. We lost, our city. Everything was destroyed. We were deported. Now we're coming back. We're starting at ground zero. Oh, we don't have to start at ground zero. We got a book. We got a manual here that tells us which tribe got what. And so it's really, really important. It doesn't seem to be particularly important, especially, let's say, for a non-Jew reading it today, but it tells me this is how orderly God is. This is what he's doing. And so it does make a lot of sense. The rabbis understood it one way. They weren't trying to reconstruct the ancient Near East. I have to because I have no other choice.
Right.
If I don't reconstruct it, then I'm going to try to read the Bible, and there's so many things that are in it that appear for me in my context sort of nonsensical. Well, and
That is
so
so true.
yeah, so my
That, that-
goal is to make sense of it. Yes.
yeah, it's like I was teaching about Joseph when he came out of the jail, and they shaved him and they put linen garments.
Yeah.
And I know that shaving is a rite of passage going from one state of from purity and purity, from profane to holy. We already knew that, but in going over the passage and studying from the ancient Near East in Egyptology,
Yeah.
it meant something. Plus, that's how the priests would dress.
Yes.
So
The
because
priest
he
would
was a
dress.
despised, I'm sorry,
Yeah, go ahead. I'm sorry. Yeah.
because he was an interpreter of dreams back in the ancient Near East. As you know, priests were mediators, and they were responsible. They were called magi, the magicians, and they were responsible for that. So when they present him before the Pharaoh, it was already assumed he must have been some kind of priest somewhere where he came from, and the way
And
they presented him.
yes, and even I think it could be even more basic than that. The fact that before this is happening to him, he's a vile Semite. And what if the
Right.
vile Semites are the ones that got hair on their face and they're swarthy looking, they have darker Mediterranean color, etc. And so this is a way to basically have him look like a good Egyptian.
True.
Uh,
Yeah.
and so rather than one of those Semites, and by the way, this might even argue that this is not happening during the Hyksos period, because the Hyksos, of course, the Hyksos, though they're Semitic, they also became Egyptians. In other words, they're Egyptianized monarchs. I just
Right.
can't fit exactly when their dynasty is. We don't know what the dynasty is. And
Yeah.
people, of course, try to convince me that they know, but I know that they don't know. But
That's
anyway.
always a big mystery right there with the Higsos.
Yes. Yeah. As if there's only one mystery that I
For sure.
to deal with.
I was thinking about, what you mentioned about Judaism, just like Christianity. And by the way, that was the question that I asked myself back in 2010 when I started. I'm thinking, what is it that Judaism and Christianity has in common? What do they have in common? And I would ask people. And normally people were not thinking that. So I said, well, modern day Judaism is it's a byproduct of after the destruction of the temple. And
Yeah.
even in Israel, they tell you that. And Christianity comes 300 years later, after the destruction of the temple. So when you talk to a Christian brother, who was not trained in the ancient Near East, their whole perspective and the whole environment is based on what they've heard according to dogma and theology within their denomination, and they stop
Right.
in John 1:1.
Yeah.
Judaism, however, they go back to Torah, but their perspective and their understanding comes from Middle Age, Judaism of the Middle Ages,
Yes.
away from
Right.
Israel,
Yes.
away from its environment, from archaeology, and not to say that they don't have value in some
Oh,
of
it
their
does.
commentary. We're
Yes.
not saying that. What we're saying is that I wanted to go as close as I could to where Moses lived and study the surrounding nations to understand how they view their environment at that time instead of removing ourselves. And the example that I use is there's a car accident. There's people inside the car who got hit, people inside the car who hit this car. There's people outside the street, on the other side of the street. There's someone on top of a building. Look at everything.
Yeah.
Who do you think is going to have the best perspective?
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, exactly. Yes.
And so, what we're trying to do is understand inheritance, not from the way we perceive it today, but from the way that it was perceived, because then we understand maybe why Reuben got so upset with his father.
Yeah.
That was a big deal that he didn't get. I mean, honor,
Right.
land, status, he lost a lot.
Yes. Right.
So if you would have been born and live in that time frame, you would have had enough reason to really get upset, because what you lost is paramount.
But exactly right. And we know that in the ancient Near East, there's no particular law about it, but we know by way of contracts that a father could choose another son to be the official firstborn. But think about it, there would have to be a pretty dramatic reason for it. And you also know that there's going to be some really hard feelings with son number one if he finds out that, I'm no longer firstborn, because of course, the reason for the double inheritance is to take care of your parents when they're older, and so you're supposed to have that for them. But everyone knows, well, maybe I'll only have to use a quarter of that, and so I'll have an extra amount, and then I have the status of firstborn, and so if I lose that, that's a really big deal. But the text never talk about the fact that they're upset about it, but it's obvious when there's a dispute. And I think I showed you a book about judicial decisions, and a lot of them are about inheritance, where they'll make a decision about inheritance based upon this or that. And so the Bible says the same thing. Why doesn't Reuben get it? Well, maybe it's because dad made the mistake of having 4 wives.
Right, that's right. Well, we see a pattern too. We saw Abraham. I took the notes. We have Abraham, and then he has Isaac as the Bet Av. In Hebrew, it's called the Bet Av, which is the head of the house, or the father of the house, and not Ishmael. Then you have Isaac. He has 2 sons. Jacob instead of Esau. Jacob, then he has Joseph instead of Reuben. And then Joseph has Ephraim instead of Manasseh. There seems to be a consistent theme throughout the Bible that this is an important thing. If you're the firstborn and you don't do what's right, you know what I mean?
Yeah, right. Exactly right. And so, and of course, we're told when the extraordinary happens, because if the ordinary happens, it doesn't make it's not interesting to put in. To me, the Bible, this sounds sort of secular, but the Bible's also drama. You're reading that for the exciting thing, and you always are supposed to expect that the unexpected is going to happen. And so, it's going to be the younger son. Otherwise, why are we being told that?
Yeah. It's like the best movie that you already know the ending before you go into it.
That's exactly right.
But only if you understand, the storyline.
Right.
It's interesting. You go see movies based on the actors you like.
Yeah, true.
And as an actor, he's going to do the same thing. Tom Cruise movies, he does the same type of scenes. It's just the same. He's not doing anything different,
Right.
But you already know the guy, so he's going to do a good part in a movie that you don't know. Imagine the Bible. Okay, so let me read from here. On page 101, at the bottom part of the page, where it says testamentary powers, but I'm reading the last paragraph. It says testament. Exploiting these limited powers are well represented among the ancient Near Eastern legal documents, which arrangements of remarkable complexity. The following example from the 15th century Nuzi, according to the annual American School of Oriental Research. I love their work.
Yeah,
I love their work. The Oriental Research,
yes,
like
this was done. I think this is Spizer's translation from 1930, by the way.
Yeah, it's old one, but it's
yeah.
I mean, there's a lot to be added after that, but I mean, the way there was like pioneers putting all this stuff together was amazing.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Exactly.
You can see their zeal. When you read it, you can see their excitement presenting all this stuff.
Yes, exactly right.
It says, the tablet of allocation is of Siki, son of Akuya. he has fixed all allocations, and his sons Elu and Arsisa, thus Siki declares. People wonder, why are you reading all that crazy stuff? Because I want you to see how complex and how
Yeah.
systematic when it came to inheritance. They didn't play around. They were very concise to whom and what was given to them.
Yes.
And there's a
Exactly.
reason for that. So, as regards to all my fields, Elu, my eldest son, and he shall take a double inheritance share. Arzisa is the younger son, and he shall take according to his share. The Siki declares, I have given my house and fields in Nuzi to my eldest son Elu. I have given my stable, which is among the large buildings together, with its vehicles to Arzisa, and Arzisa may open its entrance to the street. I have given my storehouses in Upper Nuzi beside the storehouse.
Yeah.
The Siki declares, my son Shenima has taken the fields, houses, and all the property of my brother Shurihil. Therefore, Shenima shall not be included as heir to the fields, houses, and property of my father. Akuya, he shall divide their property with Elu and Arzisa. Elu and Arzisa shall divide my storehouses. You get the picture, right?
Yeah.
So why do you think it was so precise, and why did they go to extreme pains to make sure this was this specific?
Well, it's interesting looking at this. He just added a third son there, this fellow Shinima. Why doesn't he get the inheritance? I'm going to guess that this fellow Ziki his brother must be dead. And
Right.
so and by the way, the Levirate, the whole issue of the brother-in-law law is not exclusive to the Bible. We have it in Hittite sources and also
Right.
in Middle Assyrian sources. Um, and so maybe his brother had died without male issue. And so he's assigning, for whatever reason, he's assigning another son to have that. And, even when it talks about Elo being his eldest son, he's appointing him as his eldest son. I don't know whether he's the oldest one. He might not be.
Right.
And this is probably all being done at the city gate, by the way,
Yeah,
where,
it's a legal case.
yeah, it's a legal case. And so and he might even have the sons with him,
Well,
standing there.
let's talk. Well, wait. Let's talk about that for a minute. That's this very important point you just made. If anything, it's what makes all of this a valid legal document.
Yeah.
And many people don't realize, like the story of Ruth, when she's going to be redeemed, they go to the city gates.
Yes.
I believe that when we understand the legality of these things, then it's going to make more sense as to why the information goes a little overboard to our no understanding here, but to them it was like necessary because honor was basically attached to all of this.
Yeah, exactly right. And so whatever happened, that's why, the Ruth chapter 4, here's Boaz at the city gate with Mr. So-and-so or whatever you want to call him, John Doe, I suppose in English, but
Yeah.
That and you try to connect the whole issue of the sandal there, and then what happens in Deuteronomy 25 with that particular law about the Levirate. I'm trying to remember whether we talked about that before. Since I just taught some of this stuff out in Albuquerque, I can't remember what I did and what I didn't do. And so
We have
Yeah.
talked about it before. I got a
Yeah.
question for you in regards to that.
Yeah,
I finally understood why the issue with the brother who died, the second one, okay, the reason why he died. The oldest died. He has no children. In the
Right.
Hittite document, and for what I read, the father of the son's wife can bring a child.
Right.
Okay, so that means that Tamar understood the law surrounding nations. She
Right.
was acting within her right. She didn't do anything illegal.
Right.
He broke the oath, by the way.
Yes,
Okay,
exactly right.
so the reason why he died, not because he spilled the seed, it was because he knew that if he got her pregnant, then he will not get the double blessing.
So he refused to do the duty of the brother-in-law,
Right, to
that's
keep
the
his
point.
name.
Yeah. And so that's what the sin is. And of course it's been we won't say the indelicate reasons, but they They call it from other things, and that's just completely wrong. But that's because the early church misunderstood inheritance.
Right.
Um,
Well, yeah, yeah. I mean, if they would have, at the same token, they are applying the context to something that is unrelated to it.
right. Exactly right.
I mean, yeah, that's amazing because that it could open another can of worms in the understanding of sexual behavior, but that's not the point. The
Yeah,
point that we're
right.
saying is that the sin was not that he spilled the seed. The sin was that he did not follow through on the duty to provide an heir for his brother because he
Exactly
knew
right.
he's not going to get the double blessing if he did
Right.
that.
Yeah.
So a
Yeah.
selfish thing.
In fact, worse than not getting the double blessing is that he had to pay for the child that was getting the double blessing because he's got to raise him.
Oh, that's
He's
crazy.
18 years old and sends him off to college.
And not get anything on top of that. And then he's the one who's getting the double blessing, not you.
Yeah. And
All right,
that's
let me
probably
read.
what's
Oh,
happening in Ruth 4 is that the Mr. So-and-so is realizes that his inheritance is in jeopardy if he does this, but he's not shamed by Boaz.
but you know what I love about the book of Ruth, that at the end, God has a sense of humor.
Yeah.
Okay, at the end, it mentions the genealogy.
Right.
Like, what do you want to? It's like throwing it in the guy's face. It's like, that woman that you didn't
Yeah.
want, comes this guy who eventually, by the way, will be King David come out of it. And you didn't
Yeah.
want her, by the way. It's like, can you imagine that guy in the kingdom was going to go, man, if only I would have married her.
And then not only David, Messiah.
That's exactly. And that's what I'm saying. Can you imagine that
Yeah.
guy in the kingdom is going to go like, I don't know, what was I thinking? I
Yeah.
should have married her. Let me read
Yeah.
on Numbers chapter 27, verse 8 to 11.
Oh yeah.
As a foundation. That's something that I wanted to read earlier here. Let me share the screen so we can all see it. And because inheritance is also a big deal in the New Testament.
Right.
And I
Oh yeah.
really truly believe that it's not been researched by people the way I think it should be, that will give us a deeper understanding of what Paul is conveying in Ephesians chapter 2. Talks about the inheritance. So when we go to the book of Numbers, chapter 27, Numbers 27, verse 8 to 11, it says, "And you must speak to the Israelites, saying, if a man dies and has no son, you must transfer his inheritance to his daughter. If he has no daughters, you must give his inheritance to his brothers. If he has no brothers, you must give his inheritance to his father's brothers. If his father has no brothers, then you must give his inheritance to his nearest relative from his own clan. If he will take it, he will take it as a possession." Okay, and then it says, "And it will be as a decree of stipulation for the Israelites." A very important word that, if I'm assuming, let me go here real quick. I'm going to verify this. Is mishpat. This is
Yeah.
a
Right.
dispute. This is a legal dispute, a legal
Right.
claim, by the way.
Yes. A legal decision. Yeah. Hmm.
So this cannot be changed. So when Paul is using the language of we have inheritance through the Messiah, and we grafted in,
Yeah.
then that's a big deal that he's talking about.
Very big deal. You know.
But if we don't, do you think that we will understand because in the book of Galatians, for example, it's not really about salvation. It's not even about reconciliation. It's about justification. And then it's about the inheritance.
Right.
If you are of the seed of Abraham, then you are of the promise. And the promise was a land grant.
Yeah. Very true.
Tell me a little bit about land grants as the responsibility of the king and the ancient Near East.
Oh, uh, in fact, if I'm for example, the first Nebuchadnezzar that we know of, who's around 1000 BC, um, we have a text concerning one of his subordinates, who who um, who gets a land grant from the king, and a land grant means that you're free from taxes, by the
Right.
way. And so you get your land, and the reason he got a land grant is because he did some heroic deeds helping the king out in his victory against the Elamites. Uh, and so the text itself which describes the victory happens to be a land grant. And so this is an official thing that this subordinate, this Babylonian subordinate is going to have, so he can prove. If anybody comes by asking for taxes, he can say, look, I got the land grant. It's official. It's got the royal seal on it. Don't come here again. And so it's a very big deal.
You know, so I got a few questions about that. And hopefully I've been teaching it correctly. In learning about, I think I forgot McCarthy. I think he wrote a book
Yeah,
about
McCarthy,
an article.
Treaty and Covenant. Yeah,
Right. And wow, that was really, really good. And
yeah,
let's talk about land grants. Moshe Wainfeld also talks about it. That once the king gives a grant, it's like irrevocable.
yeah.
Now,
Well,
then I
yes,
can never, I'm sorry?
it is unless I do something to show that I'm no longer loyal to you.
That's what I was going to say. But
Yeah.
but he doesn't really take the land. He can, like in the case of Israel, he can disperse them
Yes.
and then let it desolate because it's belonged to the king given to this person. But I
Right.
read somewhere and I cannot remember the quote. I'm so sorry. I was looking for it earlier. I couldn't find it. And then I read that if the descendants of that person who received the land show loyalty to the king because they're descendants of that person, then they're entitled to part of the inheritance.
Remember, this is a treaty. That's
Correct.
exactly right. Yeah. So this is a
So
treaty. And so and there's always a historical preamble about the treaty is that if I'm a subordinate to you, we're going to talk about how our relationship has continued through generations. I was a servant to your father and your father's father and and whatever it is, whether it's upper, lower, or equal, or whatever it happens to be. And so we're hoping that this will continue on in perpetuity.
now I
That's
know why. Now I understand why in the book of Exodus 20, it says, "To those who love me, up to 1,000 generations."
that's right. This is
That's really cool.
yeah, which of course that means don't take the thousand literally. It means
Yeah.
from now on, because
Well, no one. Yeah, yeah,
even in Hebrew, of course, olam means a really long time. They
yeah.
have no concept of endless eternity. We're the ones who attach it to that.
That's quite interesting because now the whole New Testament makes sense because, and I want to ask you to attach myself to something that Daniel asked me. I haven't forgotten Daniel. Um, it's in regards to strangers buying land in Israel when we already know that they were not supposed to.
Yeah,
But anyway, now I understand why the Bible goes to, in the New Testament, the language of adoption or being grafted. What Paul is
yeah,
using are really a legal mechanism to show the Gentiles who had no inheritance.
right.
I'm talking about not only within Israel, not only within Israel, but also within the Greco-Roman world, especially if
Right.
you were a slave.
Yeah, exactly right. And we know that the earliest Christians are from the lower classes, and so a lot of them are the ones who have nothing on this
Yeah,
earth. And so this is like what and what's the pledge? It's the Holy Spirit in
yeah,
Ephesians 1.
that's right. It's a seal,
The
which you
down
know what
payment.
seals mean. You
Yeah.
know,
It's
seals are like the guarantee. Once you were
yes.
sealed with something, man. Um, okay, so I always wondered because studying certain things, and we know how important the land of Israel was, the bridge between Asia and Africa is one of the most important bridges of land.
Right.
Um, the prime real estate, I call it.
Yeah.
Okay. How can Abraham Abraham comes from the land of Ur, and he would have been a stranger buying land um, in that area? Trying to figure that one out because I knew that that was not necessarily customary.
Well, it's not, and that's of course why we have these seemingly irrelevant pieces of information about Abraham buying a plot of land when his wife dies from the Hittites, and they talk
Yeah,
about it like, well, that's a big deal because, of course, that's where the temple is going to be in the
yeah.
future. And the fact that if our ancestor buys this plot of land, that's why that's the preamble to show this is the reason that it's our land. We bought it I have the document right here to show you with the scribes writing this down, that Abram bought it from the Hittites who were owning this land. And of course,
Uh-huh.
the term Hittite there is an anachronism for um, the people who were living there at Abraham's time, because by the time of the
Kingdom. Yeah.
writing, they're called Hittites, like the
Right.
term American. We talked about this before.
Um,
Mm.
Man, I had a really good comment, a question to ask you, and you made me think about the Hittites.
Yeah, of
So,
course.
okay, so I remembered. So we have understanding the legality of a treaty and
Yeah.
understanding the importance of the inheritance. Um, so Ja- um, when Jacob bought the piece of land in Shechem, when you have David buying the piece of land from Ornan the Jebusite, and then
Yes.
you have Abraham buying the piece of land from the Hittites, then that makes a binding legal. So the Bible now becomes a legal evidence of a real estate deal.
Right. It's legitimacy. And in other words, this is why we have deed to this land. And by the way, the Bible is not the legal document. It's writing about the legality of the situation.
Right.
So you can, so at the time, of course, you could read the Bible and it would refer you to where you can find this information. And of course, that happens quite a bit in the Bible where it'll talk to you about, what are my sources for the kings? Oh, it's the book of the Chronicles of the Kings of Israel and Judah, or the book of the Wars of the Lord, or whatever it might be. And they could still consult these books. We can't.
Yeah. Yeah. What's interesting to me, I don't know if you know, but Israel doesn't really have a constitution like we have. Okay. And they really didn't establish the Torah as its legal constitution. We know the Torah was placed as a treaty from the deity as a theocracy. We know today that's
Right.
not the case. But let me ask you a question as you as an expert on ancient Near East, understanding treaties the way you do. If Israel would have established, let's say, the Torah as or elements of the Torah within its constitution in 1948, according to the legality of the documents and because it was established based on its historical setting, then they would have been able to open Genesis and also in Samuel and also in anywhere where we have the evidence of a deed. And now we don't have the problem with the Palestinians because it's just so happened that every hotspot in Israel that deals with the Palestinians is actually based on the land already purchased.
Well, that's of course in an ideal fashion, that's very true. Of course, in the real world, you're going to have people who are,
Yeah.
accusing and saying, "Well, I don't accept that deed."
True.
And of course, in the Islamic tradition, they, of course, modify a lot of both the Old and New Testaments, for their own purposes.
Well, this would have this would have stood as a legal back
Yes,
in the time of the Bible per se.
right, exactly
I,
right. And of
isn't
course,
it interesting how we no longer really in the modern world, we don't respect covenants or treaties or contracts?
no, no,
I mean,
and that's the problem. And of course, I think they probably had that problem in the ancient world too. But that's the point: is that you've got this binding contract. Um, and of course you realize, whether it's a pagan contract or a Jewish one, that you're swearing to either a multiple deities or to God, and you're worried about it in the same way that if you're not particularly religious, but somebody asks you to put your hand on a stack of Bibles,
yeah,
and swear, you're thinking, well, something, I'm not sure I want to do that because maybe I might be
right.
wrong.
You
And
know,
I'm a
you
little
know
more
that
nervous about it.
on a personal level, the personal testimony. When I began to study the ancient Near East, I was confronted with what everyone is confronted with. Wow, is the Bible really real? It's the same as
Right.
everything else.
Yeah.
And and I remember that I put the books aside and I had a whole bunch of them on my desk at the time. And I made a simple, humble prayer to God. And I said, God, am I learning this to minimize you? Or am I learning this to get to know you better? And then I said, if I'm learning this to minimize you. I literally push the books away, and I
Yeah.
says, I'd rather be ignorant and not know.
Yeah.
And immediately, weeks after that, I began to study what's called Shvuah and Neder, which are oath and vows in
Yeah.
Hebrew, and also oath. And as a matter of fact, Meredith Klein has a really good article on that. Um, and that turned my whole world, because once I understood the strength of an oath, and then I read in the Bible when God says, I have made an oath, especially in the prophets, I have raised
Yeah.
my hand in an oath.
Yeah.
I remember the day that I really understood the ramifications of what that means. And I believe, and I basically put my whole faith on understanding the truth of that verse based on the legality of that word oath. And it says, and the Lord said, I believe it. And that really turned my whole focus, because then I
Well,
know that God is real, because Israel's back in the land and all that stuff. It was
yes,
really,
and it shows also your character in the sense that you wanted to do it for the right reasons. It doesn't mean you're perfect. It just means that, all right, I know why I'm doing this, and I've done it for the same reasons. It
yeah,
doesn't mean that I don't get lost in the weeds,
that's
or
right.
that's very easy to do. But the point is, I'm studying this to understand God better and how He operates, to try to clarify it. And also, but you asked a really good question when you were doing that, is this really real? Why is it so similar to everything else? And I look at it this way: God took the inadequacies of the ancient Near Eastern world and all the paganness, and transcended it. He took all sorts of things which were not necessarily good and made them into something that was acceptable to him. And
Yeah,
for example, one of those is lot casting. Because of course they do this for inheritance, not just in the
yeah.
ancient Near East, but also in the Bible. And you're thinking, wait a minute, what on earth are they doing?
First Chronicles 24, I do that.
Yeah. Well, I was thinking about this during the week, and part of it is the fact that lot casting in the ancient Near East is magic. In Israel, which is what some scholars called imitative magic. In other words, it looks like magic, but it's not. And the reason it's not is because of the source behind it. Okay, the
Yeah,
source behind it is God Himself. Uh, that's and just to bring up just a quick example, Exodus 3. When God is talking to Moses, and Moses wants, he doesn't want to go, and he doesn't want to help out because he doesn't think he's adequate. And he says, well, I need a sign. And so, um, what does God say? Well, what do you got in your hand? Oh, a stick. All right. All right. Let's make the stick
yeah,
your thing. And it's going to act like a magic thing, but it's not, because of the source behind it. So the Urim and the Thummim, whatever they are, uh, it's got to be done according to the standards that God made. Uh, and we don't know much about it. There's no manual about how they were supposed to be used. We're just told the end result.
right.
How does Saul get a no answer when he rolls the dice or whatever it is? We
That
don't know.
yeah, it's kind of interesting, because the Bible is, I found that it's so perfectly detailed in the storyline, that, in my opinion, and I'm sure you feel the same way because it's what you do too, is it's difficult to understand many things in Scripture unless you know really what the culture surrounding
Yes.
lived. It's the
In
world in
fact,
America is a lot different than 50
yeah,
years ago.
in fact, not only is it difficult to understand it, in many respects, if I don't try to understand it, I think it causes me to have disbelief, because I'm looking at something that looks so odd and so strange
Right.
and so counterintuitive. Well, why is this in the Bible? Why would they do that? That doesn't make any sense. And I've had people even ask me, even during a debate, was like, why wouldn't God, why didn't God speak to us directly? I said, well, he's speaking to us through his word, but the word was put in a real life context. We have to understand this context, but we're so, I don't know, it's kind of like fast food. We want it right now. We want to understand it, immediately. But no, you've got to work hard at it.
That's true. It's like a
Yeah.
doctor telling you, hey, you're overweight, you need to eat better. And you say, no, can I have a pill to feel better? But I'm still
Yeah.
fat.
Yeah.
I want to read something. I want to read something here real quick. Um, Let me move this. Okay. This is from, let me read the source. Dictionary of Daily Life and Biblical and Post-Biblical Antiquity
Oh,
by
yeah.
Yamauchi, Edwin.
Yeah. Yep.
Okay. I'll get your approval. That's good. You have no idea how good I feel when I quote something and I put a source and you actually recognize that it's a valid one. I mean,
Yamauchi was the best. He's still alive, by the way. He was the most humble. He is the most humble man, most godly man in our field. For those of us who are Bible believing Christians in this area, Yamauchi is like the testimony. You just
wow.
bring his name up, and I still have a wonderful relationship with him. Just just an amazing man of God.
That's great. That's a great testimony.
Yeah.
That's awesome. It says details of inheritance practices in Mesopotamia during the early second millennium BC can be gleaned from two sources: Sumerian law, Lipit Ishtar, and then you have a 20th century BC Isin, the famous code of Hammurabi, and from the 18th century BC Babylon. In the
Yeah.
household lacking male heirs, you can interrupt me anytime you want. In a household lacking male heirs, unmarried daughters could inherit, like the Lipid Ishtar says, if a man dies without male offspring, and an unmarried daughter shall be
Yeah.
his heir. I like to talk
Right.
about that.
Yeah.
That's cool because that means that you have not received a dowry.
Well, yeah, in fact, she's probably pre-puberty then too. In other words, she's not ready to be married. That's the guess. Is
Uh-huh.
so if that's the case, and by the way, if they have to put a law in like that, it means that there's probably a lot of dispute about what's going on here. Now, by the way, that's an interesting law. That's in, like I said, in the Lipit Ishtar law. By the way, it's probably not Lipit Ishtar, but it's another. We don't want to worry about. I'm not going to quibble over it, but it's a law from that period,
Yeah.
and and then you look at that. Of course, it immediately makes you think of Numbers 27, because what you didn't read in Numbers 27 is the historical precedent that
Correct.
forced that situation. It's the daughters of Zelophehad who
Benjamin, right? The
clearly
Benjamites,
all,
right?
yes, they're all unmarried, and they
Uh-huh.
all, they're all finding out that they're not getting an inheritance, and they're probably not getting a dowry or anything. And so, wait a minute, that's not fair. And and of course, this evidently was setting a new precedent. And I tell my students, my secular students, this is really cool because this sort of put a little window behind how some of the laws were actually being made. Something just like today, something happened that we didn't expect that would happen. We don't know what to do about it. Oh, we have to make a new law, a Florida law or a US
Yeah.
law or whatever it might be that will deal with it. And of course, it didn't go far enough in Numbers 27. And God, of course, knew that too. And so they got to do this. They got to match it up 10 chapters later, because really, when the Zelophehad girls are now ready to get married, they're oh, wait a minute, they can't get married outside the clan. Then the
Exactly.
inheritance is going to go. That'd be like me. I don't know if I brought this up with you guys or somebody else, but that'd be like me telling my daughter, "Hey, honey, you're ready to get married now, but you can only marry from the Chavalas family reunion." Uh, the Greeks that you meet in the family reunions, and she's going to be a little disappointed. Um,
This is the reason why I want to bring that law up, thinking about it ties in perfectly with the inheritance in
yeah,
the Bible with the daughters of the Benjamites, by the way, because they needed to
yeah.
protect the clan.
Oh, yeah.
But many people don't make those connections. And that's the point that I'm trying to cover today with you, is that when we study the scriptures, we never connect those ancient codes, or whatever you want to call them, to make a contrast. And you mentioned it just now. Obviously, there was a problem, and the same problem occurs
Yes.
in Israel within Israelites.
Yes.
So this is a prevailing theme, that they're protecting their inheritance.
Yeah. And by the way, you bring up the Benjaminites, and of course, that's the stuff at the end of the book of Judges, and that's all a bunch of hypocrisy. They're doing all these unspeakably horrible things, and then now they're feeling bad. Oh my goodness, they're not going to get their inheritance, and so
Yeah,
let's take care of that. And of course, then the book's over. You're thinking, what happened here?
left you hanging.
of course, the book isn't really over. The scroll ended, and it picks right up in First Samuel.
Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah,
There is a chapter 5 of the book,
yeah.
page 91. I have it all highlighted because it
Eh,
really caught my interest. Actually, this whole chapter, but then you cannot really read that chapter unless you continue to the next one, which is about contracts.
right, exactly right.
So because it's connected with social justice and the whole Jubilee laws, and that could be a really good connection with Yeshua quoting Isaiah 61 verse 1 when he went to the
Yeah,
synagogue.
yeah,
It's all about returning to the Jubilee, the freedom of the Jubilee. It's
yes.
quite interesting. But it says there that I like for you to talk a little bit on.
Okay.
It's connected with the New Testament indirectly. It says kings had the right to confiscate land belonging to a trader, or by the same token, they could give land to a loyal servant like Abraham,
Yeah.
and then ratify with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob.
Or
Now,
Caleb. Yeah.
and Caleb, there you go, in the bottom paragraph. A
Yeah.
ruler also will grant enemy land before or after conquest for services in the war. Moses, as God's behest, gave land in Canaan to a foreign ally of Israel. Caleb was a Kenizzite.
Yes, exactly right.
Many people don't know he was a Kenizzite, but he was
Right.
counted as if he was of the tribe of Judah, which is huge. He was a son of Esau.
Well, that's the other thing is that that this isn't strictly biological. If
Uh-huh.
I'm loyal, and we've established a relationship. By the way, this isn't going to happen, but let's just say we establish some maybe business relationship, and because of it, I get to be your son.
Uh-huh.
In other words, in other words, you want me to inherit something from you, or we connect because we're going to have our kids marry. My kids are all married, sorry. But
Yeah.
what I'm saying is that, and so I can be grafted into the Cortez line,
Right.
uh, theoretically. And then from then on, well, that's what happens when you're adopted. You take the name of the family. And
Right.
so that's exactly what happens to Caleb. Once he takes on that line, he's from the tribe of Judah. It's forever. It doesn't matter whether he's got biological line or not. He's in it.
So when Paul says we are grafted into the Commonwealth of Israel, he's not
Yeah.
talking about a religion. He's talking about a real entity
Real. Yeah.
that has an inheritance, which is the land.
Yeah. And the inheritance, of course, which is the seal of the inheritance is the Holy Spirit. So how do I know I got the inheritance? It's because the Spirit of God is within me, and it convicts me when I do wrong, and it excites me when I see things that are good. And so and it's, I mean, on a personal level, that's exactly what I knew when I was really a believer, when my life changed and I had such a completely different opinion and feeling about my faith and about what I should be doing. Before, I always knew I should pray. Now I couldn't wait to pray,
Yeah.
and all
Well,
these things that change. That's the Holy Spirit.
man, I hope the pastors don't look at you now, right now, because you just in one statement did away with replacement theology. But we're not going to get into that one.
Yeah,
Anyway,
that's all right. I'm sure that we're going to have some differences there, but that's what makes the world
that's
go.
okay. And by the way, this is the great thing about you and me, that we're talking, we have a dialogue, and we're trying to exchange. And never once have I had an agenda, neither do you.
Yeah,
And even if we have differences, that's not going to be the main focus. We can agree and disagree. It's okay. But we have learned, and I have learned a lot from you. And
likewise.
we agreed a lot more, and we have never talked about our differences.
Yeah. And
Interesting, right?
maybe we will at some point. And when we do, we'll at least my goal would be to first of all find our common ground,
Exactly.
in A, B, C, and D. And then of course when we find a difference, both of us we're going to go back and we're going to study it. We're going to come back and say, oh, now I understand why you believe what you believe.
Exactly.
And vice versa, because
Yeah.
the,
The
the
only thing I have a big problem with you, huge one, that you don't want to accept that I'm right in the sense that the Yankees are better.
yeah, just not this year. Yeah.
Oh, not this year. You're right. You're right.
Over the past
Um,
100 years, yes.
yeah. But by the way, I hope the audience saw what we just did. Uh, see, no, seriously, we're having fun with the whole thing, but I
Yeah.
want to highlight what you just did. You see, and this is the one thing I keep telling everybody. If you're my student and now you have also a professor as your teacher, understand this. What he just did is very significant, and you probably just didn't even think about it. He understood, and I understand that his team was the best this year. But then he went back to
Yeah.
a historical account of that. He understands that if we go back in the historical account of that franchise, yes, they have been better because they have won more championships.
Yep.
But I cannot disagree myself that this year they were the best. And by the way,
Yeah.
theologically, we don't do that. We
Right.
want
I
to
know.
agree with your theology, your opinion about who's best today, and we never consider what was back then.
And I also think that we are constantly trying to convince each other of the power of our own strength of interpretation
Yeah.
rather than God. God's the one, and so you and we can quibble over details. And I think when we get to heaven, God's going to be patting us on the back as that was really nice of you. Actually, both of you are wrong because you both have immature understanding
Yeah.
of A, B, or C. And so now, in fact, our differences would melt away. Uh,
That is so true. I want to ask you a question outside of the topic. Just I'm curious. All right. All right. So we know that the
all right,
story of Joseph represents a type of Messiah, right?
right.
All right. So when you read the story of Joseph, all the parallels between the story of Joseph and Yeshua are uncanny. It's incredible the connections that you see there.
Yeah.
What would you think if I submit to you and I say, hey, Professor, in the story of Joseph, Pharaoh represent the type of the Father in the heavens who gives the authority to Joseph, in this case, the Messiah. Would that line up with the interpretation if we say that Joseph is a type of Messiah? It's like a metaphor that has been used.
As long as you don't take it further than the
Right.
fact that this is, in other words, what's the purpose of a metaphor? It's to help you understand the real thing better. And so this helps
Exactly.
you understand the real thing better, but it doesn't make Pharaoh into a father like
Right.
God.
Exactly.
It doesn't make Joseph into a Messiah. It means that I can help understand the concept better. But the problem is that people who usually like to preach on the Old Testament, they take it way too far. And
Right.
they'll basically go, I don't know what you might want to call it, metaphor mania or what have you.
Yeah. Everything's a metaphor.
Yeah. And so, and that happens, it happens in a lot of evangelical, in fact, I know it happens a lot in charismatic traditions and others, but not just them, in a lot of other traditions where they'll just
Yeah.
take the metaphors and no, the metaphor is there as a guide to help you understand the real thing.
The
But
message.
in fact, that I'll just throw this out. I think a lot of the prophetic things that happen and that are fulfilled, the fulfillment is the real thing. The prophetic thing is there to help you understand. It's kind of like quoting Shakespeare. I quoted Shakespeare. It had an original context to it, but now it has meaning today. And so, for example, you look at Isaiah 7:14, behold, a virgin will conceive. In the context, something very different is going on there with Ahaz. He's not on the up and up. And so when God is saying that to him, it's pretty much like a judgment. Um,
Yeah.
but then it's taken and it transcends its original context to have the deeper New Testament meaning to it. But you can't put that New Testament meaning back up upon it.
And many people do that.
Well,
That's
I know
basically
that's the
the
problem.
foundation of many people's preaching. So, uh, would you find evidence? I know the answer, but the audience, I want them to. Would you find evidence that a sovereign or a suzerain in the ancient world was called a shepherd, the light, the sun, the father? It was an idiom for a leader, for the shepherd, for the king.
Well, the earliest text we have from the Sumerians in the middle of the third millennium, so 2500 BC, the earliest royal inscriptions, the king calls himself a shepherd.
Yeah.
And of course, you think about it, if he's a shepherd, that means I'm a sheep. And what are sheep? They're really stupid. But you think about it, that's the whole point, is that if
Yeah.
I'm a shepherd, the sheep, what are sheep? They're helpless, they're brainless. And of course, you think about, of course, the famous Psalm 23, the Lord is my shepherd. He's the ultimate shepherd. And I'm basically showing my ultimate humility by saying that I'm in front of you, I'm helpless for everything. My brain, I don't know where to go. My sustenance, I don't even know how to get
Right.
it. God is in control of all that because it could all be taken away in a second.
True. It's just like the words the son of righteousness is an idiom for a king who's righteous.
Right. The king, in fact, the Ur-Nama text, in the prologue, the king talks about himself being a shepherd, and he's righteous to the poor and the needy and the widow and the
Right.
guy who's poor. Yeah, the poor. Like I said, he's doing all those things for the little guy, the helpless person. They're populists.
Right. By the way, that's the whole every politician does the same thing. They're
Yep,
actually the whole
exactly right.
platform is righteousness and justice.
Yep. And some are
I'm
better
looking,
than others. Yeah.
I'm sorry,
Some are better than others in saying it.
for sure. When I look into the Pritchard, just to
Oh,
talk a
yeah.
little bit about that, I got away from the topic. I'm sorry. Pritchard, Ancient Near Eastern Text by Pritchard. I remember reading some of the
Here's my big ones. Yeah.
yeah, in which there's an introduction to the text, legal text, and this is Lipid Ishtar, and it's quite interesting the way some of them starts.
Yep.
There's one of them that says the son. He is the king, but he's the son, and I cannot remember right now.
Uh,
I was looking for it.
I can't remember now.
Yes, Nuna maybe.
Well, not Ishnuna. It's probably
No,
Ur-Nama then. The
yeah,
first one.
I'll find them a little bit later. But the
Yeah.
prologues and stuff is quite interesting because it talks about um, it talks about the king as the son, and then when you read
Yes.
the Elamarna, the text, the kings are the correspondence between each other with vassal and the sovereign
Right.
says, "I'm the father, you're my son,"
Right.
and it's a really amazing insight in how they communicated with each other. Then you read the Bible, and then the Bible's using the same thing.
Yes, because of course that's part of they're from the same culture. Why? In fact, I'd be suspicious if they didn't use the same type of terminology. That's the whole point of all this. And so being a son of course, when Christ is called the son, it's because he's the inheritor. He's not generated from God. He's the one who's inheriting all of God's riches is being inherited. And of course, he proves it by his righteous deeds,
Right,
a willingness to sacrifice himself. And this is Philippians 2, really, you think about it. He's declared Lord by the deeds that he does because he's an obedient son.
right. So the voice when he comes out of the water in the Jordan River,
Right,
which is if you study the Mispi ritual, is it's
right,
actually endowing God, Yeshua with the power to speak on behalf of
right.
the Father. Then when the voice comes down from heaven, he says, "This is my son that I'm well pleased." That's the language of adoption. From that moment on, he's
Yep,
speaking as if he is the Father.
right. Exactly right.
It's amazing. So the whole idea of Yeshua's ministry in this case, and as well as in the Bible, is to secure the inheritance of the people. I was reading
Yes.
a comment somebody. It's supposed to be based on an article that I saw it, and I forgot I did something and I forgot what it is. But I don't believe it like this. But the way they framed it, I now understand what it means. It says inheritance as salvation, because the gift to dwell in the land is life.
Right,
So I find this so peculiar that the land, for example, the land was a grant. It belonged to God. It is given
yes,
to Israel as a gift.
right,
The land is cherem, is set aside,
yes,
consecrated for God.
right,
Then the crops is basically belong to the Lord, but it's a way of the people paying tribute to God for
Right.
living in his land.
Exactly right.
Then the land rests. Just the same blueprint of the Messianic age. Then he picks the house of the father, which the king will be the main leader taking care of everybody. And then each family has a father with secures the
Right.
inheritance. That's quite interesting. But then when it talks about Yeshua as the firstborn, that should really perks our ears because it's not just firstborn for no purpose. When you look into the responsibility of the firstborn, it is a huge deal.
Yes. And of course, this is why people like Jehovah's Witnesses have taken, oh, firstborn. Well, no, firstborn is a title. This is he's the inheritor. It's not talking about birth, it's talking about the position that he's been put in.
That's cool.
Yeah.
So, okay, so with that being said, when in the book of Numbers says that God took the Levites as
Oh,
his firstborn instead of the children of Israel because of what happened at Mount Sinai,
right.
then that means that's irrevocable. No one can take that back.
Right. No, that's God's decision. It's and of course, remember, uh, our part of the bargain is to act righteous and abide by
Yeah.
what God has asked of us. And of course, now that we have the down payment, His Spirit, we we have a way to be able to do it because before we couldn't.
Right. So, I was talking this weekend in the congregation. I was doing the teaching about Joseph and how God is recruiting, he's looking for um, moral people, righteous people, and people that are correct in the way, doing things yashar in Hebrew, like doing
Yeah,
things straight. And that's why he recruited Ruth.
yeah,
That's why you got somebody like Caleb who stood up for the land. It's interesting. He stood up for the land, and because he defended the inheritance, God made a promise through an oath. He became a partaker of that blessing. That's quite interesting.
after they both made public declarations of their loyalty to God.
That's why I missed that point. That's
Ruth
amazing.
does that in one, of course. Ruth, when Ruth says that to Naomi, she's basically saying, I'm disavowing all the other gods. I'm loyal to the God that you follow. Naaman does the same thing. And so that's, in other words, they have to do their part of the by making the oath. And of course, the proof of the pudding is how they act afterwards.
So basically, the Shema is that oath of allegiance to God.
Yes, that's exactly what it is.
Yeah. And people don't realize that it's a serious thing to say the Shema and then completely come into what they call in Hebrew avodah zarah, strange rituals and strange cult worship.
And I'll
Um,
I'll keep on coming back to it. Now I'm able to do that because God, once I make that oath, God says, I'm going to help you with it here. I'm putting my spirit inside of you. Now, if you decide to walk, by the spirit, you can now follow all of these things. You've been
yeah.
given the ability to do it.
What do you think? And I know your time is limited. How much time you got? I ask you every week.
5. Let's say 5.
Perfect. Okay. Until 5 or
No.
5 minutes?
Yeah. Haha. Good one.
Anyway, I enjoy talking to you, man. That's great. Forgot what I was gonna say.
That's all right.
I forgot what I was gonna say. I was so say 5 o'clock, really?
It only gets worse, by the way, as you get older.
Oh man. But yeah, in regards to loyalty to God, we have so much to gain from it. And I think understanding what the duties of the firstborn and the responsibility of the inheritance, because when you read Jeremiah, specifically Ezekiel, they spent a lot of time talking about the inheritance.
Oh
And
yeah.
Paul does too. Paul really hammers that in
Yeah.
Galatians, Romans, Ephesians, in
Ephesians.
all his letters. The whole purpose is for people to understand that your allegiance to God through Messiah Yeshua would lead you to have something that the emperor cannot give you.
Yeah, exactly right.
That's kind of cool.
And
Well,
so
let me
this helps
go
me
ahead.
understand it better. That's the whole point of studying ancient Near East. It helps me understand Paul's terminology and the terminology of inheritance. It just helps me understand it better and deeper.
So how can you and how can we try to, I have a heart for the brothers in Messiah, regardless whether they're Christians
Yeah.
or, follow Torah or whatever, you know. But it seems like in this message, it's like a salmon working really hard going up the stream. Any advice that you will give me and my students as to a strategy dealing the fact that you had all those experiences going out of university that were very
Yeah.
secular and you have to present this information? What do you
Um,
recommend we do?
well, I'll tell you right now is that as hard as it was teaching in a secular university, in many respects, it was even harder dealing with Christians with this stuff. And that's what you've understood with
Yeah.
with in your context. And so I think, and I know I keep on coming back to this, but a lot of it has to do with humility. If you and I disagree, I should be able to not only understand you, but learn from you.
Mhm.
And by doing that, it's going to change me. And so I'm going to be modified. And, even our experiences,
Yeah.
I'm learning to you, I'm learning how to present myself, how to, here's a person who studied on his own. You're bringing out different things. And so I've learned something. Hopefully you've learned something.
Yeah.
And so when,
Yeah.
when you're talking to your group, you have to realize they've got their own life experiences that I can benefit from. So I'm going to tell them, this is what I've learned. Isn't this really neat? Uh, they're going to, your enthusiasm is going to come out. If you're humble about it, that's going to come out, and they're going to say, "Oh, that's interesting." If they're not interested or they're not drawn towards it, it's really not much you can do about it other than just keep on doing what you're doing. I
Yeah.
really is it any different than I mean, you have adult children, I have adult children, my children are doing fairly well, but pray I pray for them as much as I did before, and I'm thinking, oh, I wish they would do this or I wish they would do that, but they're adults. Well, guess what? They're probably thinking the same thing about me. Gee, I
True.
wish Dad would be have been better at this or that, and so I've got to realize it's not up to me to change them. It's any more than it is for me. If you are not a believer and I'm trying to convince you that 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 the way of God that's mentioned in the Bible is true, um, how am I going to convince you? Is it by beating you over the head and browbeating you and showing you that I know more than you do? Well, that's not going to help. You're going to be alienated. Uh,
Yeah.
is it by my attitude in my life, or something that's happening that you're going to show them? So it's really hard. It's
Well, even in the religious world, even if you try to do everything in a manner that's befitting a servant of God, but you speak with a confidence. But even the some people can feel maybe, I don't know, intimidated, or they don't want to
yeah.
approach it because they feel that they're not up to they don't have the same amount of information. When in
Right.
fact, you and I will be willing to just share everything we think we know so that you can learn and be better. I mean, that's the whole idea.
And
That's why
it's
you're doing this
also
with me. You want to help me.
it's much more easily accessible now than it was even 30 years ago.
Uh-huh.
Even 15 years ago when you were, starting in this, it's people can have all of this stuff at their fingertips. And this is why I think, one of our next topics is going to be about Akkadian, because I want to show you that it's going to be a lot easier than you think. You don't have to learn the script. But anyway, that's another story.
But you
But
brought that up already 4 times, so let's do next week on Katie. Because I take clues from my
yeah,
teachers when they mention something more than twice. They're
yeah,
trying to send me a picture, and you're
yeah.
not telling me you have to do this, but you've mentioned it enough times that I'm thinking, wait a minute, this is really
I,
important.
I
He's trying to
I'm
tell me,
leading, yeah, I'm leading the horse to water, and it's going to be up to you to drink.
yeah,
But I'm going to make it, but I'm going to show you that it'll be easier for you than it was for me 50 years ago to start working on this stuff. And there are certain things you don't need to do unless you became obsessed with it. But
uh-huh.
but I don't think that'll happen just because you're already obsessed with so many other things. Yeah,
Yeah,
I don't
pretty
think
much.
you don't need
Yeah, man.
another obsession.
Yeah, I mean,
I'm saying that in a good way.
my main obsession is in my studies is the temple. I mean,
Yeah.
I just love the temple. Ancient Near East. I think has completely helped me understand why the temple functions the way that it did. It's
Well, and that'll be another one of our talks down the road too.
on what? On what?
On the temple, sure.
Oh, I would love to talk to you about
Ancient
that.
Near Eastern temple.
That would be great. That would be
Yeah.
great. I'll do that. Well, Professor, thank you for your time. As always, I'm grateful. And every single one of you, please go in and check out Professor on Facebook. He was asking me, hey, how many people are like asking me friend request? But, reach out to him. He's a really nice guy. And I think you're going to learn a lot. And if they want to reach out to you, what's the best way?
Well, the email,
Email.
it's so email. So, and Rico, you can put it up for them. I mean, I can spell it out, but you got my email there somewhere, but
Yes.
you're welcome to post it on there or put it in. People can email me and then I can, interactive. I get random emails all the time. Believe me.
That's great. That's great. That's great. We're getting ready to go into Egyptology, but we're going to continue
Yeah.
to do this. I got to go back and start studying my Egyptology stuff, but we're going to continue to study this in the ancient Near East. I think.
Well, let me think of somebody else to contact if you still haven't been able to get a hold of Hoffmeyer. We'll think
Man, I
about
have
it.
not been able to. I've tried, but
Yeah.
one of his Facebooks, he has an answers in 2020.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's been a while. But it's going to be great. So guys, please join with us again. Next week, you're not going to be with me Monday, right?
Not on Monday. So we'll figure out
The day.
figure out details.
If we cannot do it live, then what we'll do, we're going to do it recorded, and then we're going to post it for you guys. So thank you for joining me today. I hope this teaching was a blessing to you. It's a good conversation. I'm learning a lot, and more so, you get to see someone like Professor at a high level of scholarship having a conversation and exchanging with other people so we can grow and we can learn together. And that's important for you to see, because many of us sometimes don't do that in the religious world. It's
Yep.
always an argument and a tug of war.
Yep.
And by the way, we study this. I study ancient Near East, not as many years as he has, but he is willing to exchange with me and correct if I need correction and push back, like he likes to use, when he doesn't necessarily agree with me. And it's only so that I can better improve in my understanding and maybe look at other areas that I haven't considered. So please do that in your biblical studies and don't be closed-minded to new things. Just always ask the Spirit of the living God to bear witness and to lead
Amen.
you in the right path. Shalom to every single one of you. We'll see you guys next time. Bye-bye.